Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kim Barrett Show. I am your host, Kim Barrett, and today we are joined by former Olympian NBL superstar, Mr. Damian Martin. And we're looking at all things about high performance, performing teams, and competing at that elite level like the Olympics. Now, if you're someone who wants to check that out, this episode is going to be the one for you. And if we can help you with your marketing, head over to www.joinmygroup.com.au. But until then, let's jump into the show.
But this is Damian Martin. If you guys don't know who he is, he's obviously Australian. Obviously, he's an Australian Olympian, done phenomenally well in the world of sport. But also, he's obviously transitioned now into business and life after sport. So I'm really excited to have him here. I'm also excited to hear from him. So please give him a huge round of applause.
Thanks a lot for having me along today, and I'll talk a little bit about how a boy growing up in country New South Wales has ended up in Perth and call it home, even though I'm retired now from playing, through to anything and everything, and then a bit of Q&A afterwards. So if there's anything you want me to elaborate on while I'm chatting, please keep this as informal as possible. Don't feel like you're going to wait till the end. I'm happy to stop and go through it in a little bit more detail. I grew up in a tiny little dairy farming community called Gloucester. So back then in the 1980s, when I grew up there, was a population of about 2,500 people. To this day, it's still a population of about 2,500 people. But mum and dad are from Sydney originally, so dad graduated with a commerce law degree from the University of New South Wales. Mum was a nurse at St Vincent's Hospital, and then upon graduating, dad only got offered one job interview in a town he never heard of, which back then was about a 5-hour drive. These days it's about 3.5 hours. He went up, did the interview, got offered the job, he accepted, but he hadn't told my mum any of this. So he got back to Sydney, convinced my mum that the following weekend they'd go for a little country getaway, and 5 hours later, upon entering Gloucester, dad turned to mum and said, "Oh, by the way, I've accepted a job here, we're going to be moving here." And mum burst out into tears, adamant she'd be a Sydney girl for her whole life. And I think seeing her reaction, dad realised I made a mistake here. So he made a commitment to mum that let's get ahead financially, we'll move back to Sydney, open up our own law practice and go from there, which they did commit to then and there on the spot, but there's not a whole lot to do in Gloucester, so they end up having 5 kids in the next 6 years, and they're still in Gloucester this day. So for me, it was the best thing that could have happened. At the time, you think you're living in a boring country town, but what we took for granted was the fact that we only had one basketball court, but it was a great basketball court. We had 2 rugby league fields, soccer, cricket, water polo. Sport was massive in town. Everyone did it. And even though we had no AFL whatsoever, pretty much every other major sport at some stage throughout my life I played it and loved it. And then as a 15-year-old, my teammates were sick of all the travel that playing basketball required. We were travelling upwards of 6.5 hours to go and play in tournaments in Coffs Harbour and Casino in northern New South Wales. So after a year of that, they said, "No, we're going to stop playing basketball and play rugby league." And there simply just weren't enough numbers to continue playing representative basketball. But mum and dad, knowing how much I was enjoying the game, they said, if I want to continue to play basketball, dad would knock off work at 5 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, pick me up from home, drive an hour and a half each way to Newcastle, and then again upwards of 3.5 hours to Sydney on the weekend for games. And as a 15-year-old, you don't really understand how much of a sacrifice that entails. Not only was dad working massive hours, 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. growing his business, but then it also meant mum was essentially a single mother of 4, and my siblings didn't get to see their dad 2, 3, 4 days a week. And after 12 months of doing that, it was me that turned to mum and dad and said, "I'm sick of the travel, I'm sick of missing parties on the weekend, me. And I didn't realise how selfish I was at the time, but they didn't judge me when I said I want to quit basketball and I'm going to join my teammates or my high school mates and go to rugby league. Instead, they supported my decision and they started coming to all my rugby league games. And then after about 9 months of no basketball whatsoever, I got a phone call out of the blue. And the guy at the end of the line was Rob Beveridge, who I'd never heard of, but at that stage he was the New South Wales Institute of Sport coach for basketball. So he introduced himself and he said if mum or dad were willing to drive an hour to Raymond Terrace McDonald's, he wanted to meet with me to discuss the possibility of coming back to basketball. There's no McDonald's in Gloucester, so it's a no-brainer. Yep, we'll be there. Called dad, he knocked off work, and about an hour and a half later, was sitting across from Rob Beveridge. Now, Bevo went on to be the coach here for the Wildcats in 2009 through to 2012. So if anyone who remembers Bevo, it's fitting that sitting across from a guy who looks like Ronald McDonald, he convinced me then and there on the spot to quit rugby league. He made me call my coach, and in doing so, he gave me a scholarship to the New South Wales Institute of Sport. But the thing that happened there was, I call it my sliding doors moment in life, was he asked me the simplest of questions, but one I'd never been asked nor had I answered. And it was, if you could do anything in basketball, what would it be? And I never thought like that. I had goals, but they were more like, if we had a game this weekend, I want to win. If I had an upcoming tryout for a New South Wales team, I wanted to make that team. But beyond 2 or 3 month goals, I had nothing further. He said, no, I mean anything. In years to come, if you could do anything in sport, what would it be? And in that moment, for whatever reason, I thought of the Barcelona Olympics. It was 1992. I was only 8 years of age at that stage, but I was obsessed with the Olympics. My eldest brother and I, we taped all the Australian Boomers games, all the US Dream Team games on the old VHS, and we just replayed them over and over and over again. So when I asked that question, I said, I'd love to be an Olympian, not believing at all it could be a possibility. But instead of judging me, instead of cutting me down, you grow up with tall poppy syndrome, he looked me in the eye and said, I believe you can be an Olympian. You're going to have to work harder than ever. You're going to have to make more sacrifices than ever. And he kind of laid out this pathway. And I remember getting back in the car with Dad, and prior to this trip, this return trip back home, pretty much every other drive I had with Dad, we had a Toyota Tarago. It was a big car. We'd fold down the middle seats, and I just kind of slept to and from training sessions. But I sat up front with Dad, and we just went back and forth, just saying, even 50% of what Bevo just said comes to fruition. This would be amazing. And so he made a commitment to me there that if he and Mum are willing to make all those sacrifices again to get me to and from training sessions, to and from games, that I had to make a promise that I wouldn't complain about how I was spending the car, parties I was going to miss on the weekend, etc., etc. And we did. And after 12 months of Bevo's guidance and getting back into the game, I got a scholarship to the Australian Institute of Sport in Canberra. And it was the most nerve-wracking day of my life. I was 17, I just finished year 11, I was moving to Canberra to live in a dorm where you got 12 basketball scholarship holders in the men's basketball program, and then one adult who was essentially your caretaker. But I remember on day one, we were all trying to act tough, and in years to come, it turns out that of the 12 of us on scholarship, just about all of us were, crying as we said goodbye to our mums and dads. But we didn't make it seem that way on day one. But Andrew Bogut was out of Victoria. He was the only player on scholarship who never represented his state at that stage. He'd been cut from every Victorian state team and hadn't represented Australia. And then Aaron Bruce, who was the stud out of Victoria at that stage, he turned to Bogut on day one and said, Bogut, were you surprised to get a scholarship? He said, no. And we're thinking, how arrogant is this guy? 2 weeks ago, he got cut from the state team. What's he talking about? And then on day 5, we're sitting around in a room as big as this, and one by one, we were talking about where do you see yourself in 5 years, a bit of goal setting. And one by one, most of us were saying, want to play in the NBL or collegiate basketball in the NBA. It got to Bogut, and there were no Australians in the NBA at that stage. And Bogut said, I'll be in the NBA. And the follow-up question was, how are you going to achieve that? I'm going to go to university in America. Now, this is a guy that had been cut from all the state teams. Coaches were telling him he's not good enough. Teammates were judging him. But instead of doing what the majority of people would do and listen to that and give up on his hopes and aspirations, he used it as motivation to train and play with a chip on his shoulder. And after 12 months, he went from being our worst player on scholarship to our best through hard work. Nothing more than that. His mental toughness and resilience is something I've always been envious of, and he's the best at it that I know. But it came down to hard work and dedication and wanting it more. And so when he made his first Australian team, we went away to Greece for the World Under-20s, and he won a gold medal, the first and only time an Australian Under-20s team's done that. And he got named MVP of that tournament. And upon getting the MVP, the local pro team in Greece offered him a multi-million-dollar contract to stay and play in Greece. Now, his family escaped the war in Croatia, fled to Melbourne with no money. So imagine being 19 years of age and being offered millions of dollars to stay and play basketball. Instead, credit to him, he said no, because going back to that meeting 18 months prior, he thought the best way to get to his goal of the NBA was to go to the University of Utah, where he wouldn't get paid a cent. So he did. And after 2 years, he went number 1 in the NBA draft, NBA champion, has made over $100 million, and here I am today. So things went slightly different in our careers. But Bogut's incredible. And it came to, I heard the back end of what Kim was saying before, hard work. There's no shortcuts are allowed, it was hard work. When I got back from the World Cup, we had about 2 or 3 months to go on my scholarship in Canberra, so I was into year 2 of the 2-year scholarship. And normally what would happen is you'd walk into the common room, so 12 bedrooms, one common room. You'd walk in and there could be 6 or 7 of us in there at any given stage. And a player would walk in and say, hey guys, just to let you know, I've accepted a scholarship to go and play basketball in Texas, or to go and play in Florida, or I'm going to the turn pro and play in the NBL. And it was getting closer and closer to me graduating, but I didn't really have any offers at that stage. And I remember one day walking back in and there's the pigeonhole where we all had a little mailbox and I had an envelope in there. I opened the envelope. It was a letter offering me a scholarship to a school called Rio Olympics University in Los Angeles, and a DVD just showcasing the highlights of this school. These days they fly you over and you get to go through a couple of campuses. Back then it was just recruitment by DVD. And I remember looking at it going, yep, ticks all the boxes of Martha. Division I basketball on the West Coast at a school I believe I might be able to play at. And so I remember feeling really good about myself, walking into the common room, and there's about 5 guys in there at that stage. I said, oh, can I get everyone's attention? Just want to let you know I've been offered a scholarship to Loyola Marymount University in LA. I'm going to accept it. And I think it was Reece Carter, who was probably one of our better players at that stage. He turned to me and said, oh, congratulations, mate. Yeah, they offered all of us a scholarship, but good for you for taking it. So I was brought back to reality quite quickly. Moved to LA for 4 years, and it was just like a bad comedy movie. The sororities, fraternities, the partying, they follow their Division I sports as much as they follow their professional sports. It was incredible. The infrastructure put in place for 18 through 22-year-olds was amazing. Incredible for my development. You get a degree paid for and a life experience. But after graduating, I got a call from Bevo, the guy I mentioned before, and he then accepted his first ever professional coaching gig in the NBL with a team called the West Sydney Razorbacks, which are no longer around. And he offered me a contract. And that's one of those moments for me where I'll never forget where I was, sitting at my desk in my dorm room, signing that contract, and then getting the call, Mum and Dad, and saying, I've accepted a job, I'm coming back to New South Wales, I'll be living in Sydney. And back then, I had 3 siblings living in Sydney, Mum and Dad, still up in Gloucester. And so it was an amazing moment. Flew back to Sydney, I joined the team, things were going well. Into year 2, I got injured. And I remember a week before Christmas in 2008, got an email from our then owner saying, I'm sick of losing money, I'm not paying you guys anymore, I'm handing the licence back to the team. And we kind of sat around in a circle, just flabbergasted, thinking, well, for me it wasn't too bad. I had a few credit card bills and rent, that was basically it. But for some of my teammates, at the back end of their career, they got wives, mortgages, the home loans, school fees, whatever it may be, and they've just been told they're not going to get paid anymore. So we made a commitment that we'd play out the back end of the season and we'd divide the gate takings at the games. If anyone remembers, we changed our name to the Sydney Spirit. We get about 400 people to a game, so you literally walk out on court, see Mum and Dad, say, thanks Mum and Dad for your $20, we're going to divide that by 15 on us. It was, at the time, it felt like the worst thing ever. I maxed out my credit card, had to borrow money off Dad, etc., etc. But in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it essentially meant I was out of a job, and Bevo was out of a job and he got offered the coaching gig out here with the Wildcats. He brought myself and a couple of others out here. In Sydney, I thought I knew what it meant to be a professional athlete. I went to weights, I lifted hard. I went to training, got on court, I trained as hard as I could. End of the training session, Bevo would say Wildcats, 1, 2, 3, we'd say Wildcats and get out of there. Game day, we'd try as hard as we could to win, but win or lose, we went out into the city together. Moving to Perth, I thought on day 1, I want to make a good impression. So I got to weights nice and early. And I got there, and Sean Reddish was one of the best players in the league at that stage, was already at weights and already had a sweat going. We lifted our program, got through our program, and then we moved over to training. It was about 45 minutes between the end of weights and the beginning of training. Sean laced up, got his boots on, grabbed the ball, went to a far court, and worked on his individual skill set. And then training began, and then we trained as hard as we could for 2.5 hours. End of training, 1, 2, 3 Wildcats. In Sydney, we would have gone our separate way. In Perth, I saw Sean grab that same ball, go to the same far ring, and work on his individual skill set for another 30 minutes. And because he was one of our best players, I thought, okay, I'm going to follow whatever he does. And then he did stretching, ice bars, visualisation, sports psychology. Diet was impeccable. He got plenty of sleep. So all of those cliche 1%ers you hear athletes talk about, he did. And he didn't just do it when the media were there or after losses or before finals, every single day. And that's why he slowly but surely got better every single season. And that's why he had longevity in his career. And that's why when he retired, he could retire knowing he got the utmost out of his natural ability. And so I've got a sports management company now. And one of the things I tell 16 and 17-year-old kids when I'm chatting to them and their parents is, I ask them the same question Bevo asked me, And then when I say, a lot of them say they want to be a professional basketball player, I say, don't want to aim to be a professional basketball player. Aim to be elite. Because if you have elite daily behaviours, the ones I just spoke about that Sean had, then your skill set will get you to a level where you're going to make money out of it. Being a pro athlete simply means it's your profession, you make money from it. There are a lot of professional athletes out there. But if you can be elite, who knows how much money that'll pay you, who knows which countries it'll take you to, which experiences it'll create, and doors it'll open. And so my biggest thing is don't aim to be pro, aim to be elite. And that's elite daily behaviours on the court and then also off it. But moving to Perth was the best thing that ever happened to me. Like I said, when I got fired from Sydney, it felt like the worst thing in my life. But when I moved to Perth, I didn't know much about Perth other than Challenge Stadium where we played, the Novotel where we stayed, and the airport where obviously we flew in and out of. But I've got cousins in Rockingham who I hadn't seen for about 10 to 15 years. And I remember when I signed the agreement with the Wildcats, they said, we'll pick you up from the airport and we'll give you a tour of Perth. So I remember being quite nervous, moving interstate by myself in my early 20s. I get down the escalator, and there are these three big burly boys with tattoos and beards, and this girl with long blonde dreadlocks. And they said, Marto, we're your cousins, here's your Dockers jersey. So I was like, never heard of the Dockers, not a problem. Flung this thing over my shoulder. It's all rugby league territory. Even to this day, it's all two posts, not four. So Nat Fife, my nickname knew we walk down the main street in Gloucester, no one would know who they are. So I put this jersey over my shoulder and off we went on this tour of Perth. I remember driving along, they pointed out to the city, they said, oh, that's downtown, that's the CBD, we'll take you through there another day. Turning south down Mount Spain and then on to Stirling, pointed up to Kings Park, they said, that's Kings Park, number one tourist spot in Western Australia, it's pretty nice, we'll take you there another day. Kept heading down Stirling, they said, Cottesloe Beach is about 2 kilometres to the west, a really nice beach, we'll take you there another day. The only place we stopped on this tour of Perth was the Railway Hotel in North Fremantle because it was cheap beers and skimpies that day. So that was my introduction to Perth. But about 4 days later, I got asked to do my first ever radio interview, and I realised in those first 4 days that life seemed to revolve around the Dockers and the Eagles. And I didn't know a thing about either of them. So when I got asked to go into the studio to do radio, I called my cousin who'd given me the jersey and I said, in case they ask me about football, who do I say I go for again? He said the Fremantle Dockers. But they asked me specifics about players, who should I say is my favourite player? And back then the best two players were Aaron Sandilands and Matthew Pavlich, not a problem. So I'm in the studio, quite nervous, first ever radio interview I've ever done. And the guy was very good. Life in Sydney versus life in Perth, Sydney Spirit versus Wildcats. Final question he asked is, well, you live in WA now, who's your team? I said, Fremantle Dockers, I'm blue purple. Not a problem. Who's your favourite player? Oh, Matthew Sandilands. You can't go wrong. Completely butchered it. My cousin called me and said, you idiot, and I've never lived it down to this day. But all those things I learned from Sean and from the Wildcats, he did it, I followed, some others followed, and so when people ask me about the culture of the Wildcats, when I was there, I can honestly say the culture of the club was the unspoken things that happened. And that was, before and after training, you're going to see all 12, all 15 players go and do extras. Then they're not going to take shortcuts even when the coaches aren't there. One of my favourite sayings from Michael Jordan was championships are won when no one's in the stands. And I think the Wildcats were a prime example of that. And you didn't want to let your teammate down. And those who did, those who weren't willing to stick around after training and work on their game, those who didn't do the ice baths or whatever it may have been, they usually had a 1 or 2 year career with the Wildcats. Didn't matter how good of a player they weren't going to get the best out of themselves, which wasn't a good enough standard for the rest of us. And as a captain, I remember we'd sit across players-only meeting and we'd go through 3 core values every pre-season. And you come up with words like brotherhood, commitment, relentless. Under those values, you'd have non-negotiable behaviours, and you'd come up with this list of non-negotiable behaviours. But then at the bottom of it, we'd simply say hold each other accountable. Because if we'd gone through a 2-hour session of trying to come up with our values, and then we didn't hold each other accountable, that 2 hours was as valuable as the piece of paper those words are written on. And the biggest thing we took from it was, if I witnessed see someone take a shortcut, then I'd probably come down hard on that person who didn't call out the other person who took the shortcut. And also understanding whose voice it should come from. Reece Bay, he plays in the NBL still, but he was a young up-and-comer out of Western Australia. Incredible guy, huge amount of talent. But he loved Bryce Cotton. And so on the back of his phone, he used to have Roger Federer. I idolised Roger Federer. And then after a couple of months, I realised one day his phone beeped and on the back was Bryce Cotton. I'm like, you can't have your teammate on the back of your phone. What are you doing? But I also realised that if we need to get the most out of Reece, in particular at that age, usually comes down to your confidence and behaviours. It's one thing coming from me as captain or Trevor Gleeson as the coach, but way better than that is, hey Bryce, can you go and speak to Reece and tell him how well he's doing? Encourage him, because we know that'd be much more valuable coming from someone like Bryce than it would from us. And that can be said about all the guys on the team throughout that era. It was always about the bigger picture. And I remember one of the biggest learnings I had was we had a teammate, he was an American guy, and he was just going through a form slump and we were losing. But win or lose, he'd still go out and it didn't seem to affect him. And I remember after our third loss in a row, he just went straight out and partied and I was livid. And so I remember just asking him to grab a coffee the following Monday, and I sat across with him for 45 minutes and I spoke about how incredible it is when you win a championship, the final siren sounds, the confetti drops, you embrace your teammates, you grab the trophy, etc., etc. And I realised it was in one ear, out the other. And then almost as a throwaway question after 45 minutes, I said, plus if we win, you can ask for an extra 45k next year on your contract. And he literally sat up in his seat and he said, now you're speaking my language. And I was furious. I remember being so mad internally. But I also realised that just because I have different motivations and different goals doesn't mean that's the right way or the wrong way. As long as individuals' goals, his individual goal was never going to take away from our team goals. And the team goal was to always win the championship. So if I have to play to him and money to motivate him to help the team, and he wasn't going to play in a selfish way that took away from the team, he was going to put in and we could have some success, I'd play to them. And I realised the more and more I get to know my teammates, who are now my business colleagues, it's got to be more. It's got to be beyond the surface of just name, job description, and the bare basics. It is getting to know what they get up to when they're away from the office. What does motivate them? When I first left basketball, I'd been amongst such a high-achieving group of people who really wanted to do the one common thing together, that's win a championship. And when I moved into other businesses, I realised that some people just want to be able to make enough money so that on the weekend they don't have to worry about a job, they can go and enjoy time with the family. And I couldn't let that upset me, and I started to embrace it. Okay, let's get the utmost out of you while you're here Monday to Friday, achieve all your goals so that you're happy again come Monday and be productive again. And then there'd still be other people who know I want to be the absolute best at this. And I love that, but I had to juggle, how do I motivate colleagues, teammates, whatever it might be, depending on who they are as individuals. Sometimes we just take it for granted and never really get to know who they are. And I remember, I once got told that you should never communicate to, connect with, and that was huge for me because the best game we'd ever play every single season for the Perth Wildcats was called the Pink Game. So it's the game where we wear a hot pink jersey and shorts in honour of Breast Cancer Care WA, because our coach Trevor Gleeson, his wife's a two-time survivor of breast cancer. And that's the only time where Trevor, he's won 5 championships, which is the second most all-time of any coach, but it's the only time, in my opinion, that he really let his guard down in front of the whole group and would be a dad, and be a husband, and be a father, and be just a normal bloke. In all the other times, he was blue-collar, it's all about winning, it's all about basketball. But when he would open up about what it's like to be the husband of someone to breast cancer, the dad of 2 kids who are asking if their mum's going to die, and then showed that raw emotion, it took us to another level. So when I heard the saying, you should always try not to communicate to, but connect with, I was like, that's probably why we always played so well that round, is because he had that beautiful balance of incredible IQ within the sport and game plan, but also he was connecting to all of us on a level that was far beyond just a game. And so that was a big lesson I've tried to carry over into sport as well. And then the other one is, I've met some very, very, very smart people, way smarter than I'll ever be, but they come and say, when it comes to leadership, why can't I get the best out of the people they're essentially the GM or the CEO for? And it was because they didn't know how to communicate with them. And they, I can honestly say, cared about them. But if you're an employee of these people then have no idea that they were cared for. And so my big thing is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And we had to loosen them up and show them just a person. Don't worry about the P&Ls, take them out, have some fun, get to know them. Because I guarantee a lot of people don't truly get to know the people they work alongside, even if they're demanding the utmost of them. The Wildcats brought a lot of success, and on the back of that success, then I got asked to go and play on a few Australian teams. And like I said, in that meeting with Bevo all those years earlier, it was ultimate goal was to play at the Olympics. And in 2012, I've been a part of all the Australian teams in 2009, 2010, 2011, the first half of 2012. Got called into the final selection camp for the London Olympic team in 2012, and they had to cut 4 of us. So 16 went into the camp, they had to make a cut of 4, they take 12 along. And on the final day, we get a text message saying tomorrow at this time, you'll be back in your capital city and we'll give you a call to notify you whether you made the team or not. So we finished our final training session, jumped on planes, all went our own way, and then the following day we got a phone call with the coaching staff, a couple of members of Basketball Australia, and they told us whether we made the team or not. And on that list, I believe I was number 3. And it turns out the first 4 on that list were the 4 they had to cut. And I remember taking the phone call and just being absolutely devastated when I found out I'd been cut from this team. And it was the off-season for the Wildcats, so I didn't have my day-to-day routine. I wasn't seeing my teammates, who were also my best friends. And so I just kind of spiraled. Because in that moment, I felt like the biggest failure, a loser, no good at the game, disappointed my parents for all the sacrifices they'd made, my siblings, for all the sacrifices they'd made. And I questioned my love and my ability for the game. And for about 2 months, I did. I didn't live a healthy life. And it was like I woke up every day for those 2 months, and on my hand I had words written like failure, loser, disappointment, and that's all I could see was directly in front of my eyes. And after 2 months of living that way, I got a phone call from Mum, and I remember driving along Riverside Drive, and she asked what I was up to, and I just told her I was driving through the city, and she asked me to pull over. I said, no, it's okay, you're on speakerphone. She said, no, can you please pull over? And that was the first time she ever asked me to pull over, so I knew in that moment she was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. So I pulled over, and she told me my dad, who I idolised more than anyone else in the world, had been diagnosed with cancer. And I just burst out into tears. You know, the combination of hearing that's going on with Dad, through probably letting everything come to the surface of what I've been doing the last 2 months. And I think upon hearing my reaction, I heard my dad cry for the first time ever in the background. And so in that moment, I realised how selfish I'd been living. And it's not like I moved on completely, but instead of living like this, now it was like this, and there's an arm's reach. I can see all these other things going on, but way more important. At the end of the day, I got cut from a sporting team. I really wanted to make that team, but that's what it was. What's way more important is my dad's health. I've been a horrible son for the last couple of months, sibling and friend. And I also love the game. Who am I kidding? So I simplified all my games, all my goals in the sport to winning as many championships as possible in whatever time I've got left in the game. So I jumped on a plane the next day with my wife. We headed back to Gloucester and spent a couple of weeks back home. And then I came back to Perth and loved the game, and we continued to win a few more championships, and it was a lot of fun. I got called into the 2014 World Cup squad. They had to cut 2 of us. I was one of the 2 they cut. But I was in a better place mentally. I said, not a problem, good luck. 2 more years later, I got called into the 2016 Rio Olympics squad. They had to cut 4 of us again. And in that time, we realised that if you were the top 2 or top 4 on that list, that you were the ones that were going to get cut. But the coaches got wind of that. So without telling us, they just sent through the order. But this time, it was, it wasn't the top 2 or top 4. It was just how I'm not going to tell you. And I remember at 3 p.m, pacing up and down this hallway in a hotel in Melbourne. Luke Longley, 7'3", 140 kilos, won 3 championships with the Chicago Bulls alongside Jordan Pippen, one of Australia's all-time greatest players. He was the assistant coach with the Boomers and a friend of mine. And he opened the door and did not make any eye contact with me at all. He said, come on in, mate. And I thought, this is a horrible start. So I walked into the room. There's 1 chair here. Luke Longley's to my left. Andre Lemanis, the head coach, directly in front of me. Trevor Gleeson, the other assistant coach, to my right. Unbeknown to me, they thought it'd be funny to make me feel like I was going to get cut from the team. And I was sitting further and further in my chair. And then a smile crossed Andre's face. He said, congratulations, mate. We're taking you along. You're an Olympian. And in that moment, it was the best moment of my life. And I must have thought I had superhuman strength because I went to give Luke Longley a bear hug and lift him up, did not budge him whatsoever. Gave the other coaches a card and they said, get out of here, mate, go and see your loved ones. So I called my wife on FaceTime and she burst out into tears, and that became the best moment of my life. But then I got to call Mum and Dad on FaceTime after that, told I made the Olympic team, saw their reaction, and for the second only time in my life, I saw my old man cry, this time for much different reasons. So when people ask me the best thing that basketball ever brought to me was that moment. The Olympics were amazing, winning championships were a lot of fun, it was a privilege to be part of it, but that moment where I was just telling Mum and Dad what the news was and seeing their reaction, that was staying with me for life. So it's funny, these 3 things that I brought along, they sit in the closet, but when you get asked to bring them out or you have a reason to bring them out, the memories come flooding back, none more fonder than that one. The games are amazing. I kind of break it down to life in the athlete's village, life on the basketball court, and then life just being a spectator, going out and encouraging the other athletes. We flew to Argentina for a pre-Olympic warm-up tournament, And so we're in Argentina, we played 3 games, and then after the final game, Andrew Bogut, who was the captain of the team or leader of the team, he said, all right guys, before we fly into Brazil tomorrow, Argentina's renowned for having the best steaks in the world, let's go out, players only dinner. So I'm like, sweet. Grabbed my $40 per diem from our manager, and off we went to this steak restaurant. Appetizers, mains, desserts, an incredible night. The food was amazing. And I thought, okay, well, my $40 isn't going to cover this, but it's a one-off experience. It's worth it. Now, on this team, there was 8 players in the NBA, all earning anywhere from $8 million a year to $14 million a year. There was one guy playing in Europe on about $700,000 a year, and then 3 of us here in the NBL earning significantly less. And I'm talking way less. So at the end of the night, I'm thinking, maybe I'm going to be stunned for a couple of $100. And then Bogut, who just won a championship with the Golden State Warriors in the NBA, he said, all right, guys, this is the game we play with the Warriors. It's called credit card roulette. I want everyone to put your credit card in a hat. One by one, we're going to have the waitress pull them out, and whoever has the last credit card has to pay for the whole bill. And I remember thinking, my credit card's going to bounce. Like, this is the most nervous I've ever been. During about 13 years of professional basketball, this is the most nervous I've ever been. And I pretend like I don't remember, but I was the 6th card out and felt so much better. So I got to the bottom, and it was Chris Goulding, who played for Melbourne, and we had a bit of a rivalry with Melbourne, so I was like, oh, you. I like to think the NBA guy's not thinking, he's a hell of a guy. Flew into the Olympic Village the next day, and I was just like a kid on Christmas morning. Every time I saw the 5 Olympic rings, I'm taking a photo. Every time I saw an athlete I admired, I was taking a photo. And for 2.5 weeks whilst you're there, the Aussies only wore green and gold. The Spaniards only wore red, Kiwis only wore black. You just get so caught up in national pride. And every individual realised no individual is bigger than the games themselves, and no team is bigger than the games themselves. It's just an amazing environment to be part of. And after about 100 photos later, and I was only there for about 45 minutes, Paddy Mills was at his 3rd Olympics by then, and he looked over and said, mate, you're here for another 2.5 weeks. Stop taking photos, you look like an idiot. Went over to the dining hall the next morning for breakfast, and this place is about 100 metres long, everything's free, and every cuisine you could think of. I remember sitting down alongside Paddy, and I see Rafael Nadal go and put bread in the toaster. And I'm like, Paddy, let's go take one more photo, mate. The last night we went out as a team, I drank way too much, and I lost my phone that had all those photos on it. So anyway, so someone in Brazil's got way too many selfies of me. Which wouldn't be pretty. The games are amazing. The lessons learned on and off the court have helped me both at that stage of my life and into retirement. And there's plenty of stories I'm happy to share, but I know I've probably gone a little bit longer than expected. So I'm happy to throw it out to Q&A. And if there are any questions, please fire away. I'm happy to answer whatever you've got. But thanks again for having me along today.
Guys, that was the end of the first part of this episode with Mr. Damian Martin. Make sure you stay tuned for number 2. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you like, comment, and share.